prajabir agavan api yad asau lokapalanam bibartyo jasvate jasa navadhyeya prajapala prajabir agavan api yad asau lokapalanam bibartyo jasvate jasa. Mataji? By the citizens. Agavan, ever sinful. Api, even though. Yat, because. Asau, he. Lokapalanam, of many kings. Bibharti, mountains. Ojaha, prowess. Swate jasa, by personal influence. Translation. It is the duty of all citizens in a state never to insult the king, even though he sometimes appears to have done something very sinful. Because of his prowess, the king is always more influential than all other ruling chiefs. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. According to Vedic civilization, the king is supposed to be the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is called Nara Narayana, indicating that Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appears in human society as the king. It is etiquette that neither a Brahmana nor a Kshatriya is ever insulted by the citizens. Even though a king appears to be sinful, the citizens should not insult him. But in the case of Vena, it appears that he was cursed by the Nara Devatas. Therefore, it was concluded that his sinful activities were very grievous. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Narayanam namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamudirayet. Nastaprayesu abhadresu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttamasloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. Nama om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Indradumna Swami Dittinamine. Namo Prabhupada Prirasaya Jagannatha Yatrananda Murtaye Bhakta Sukena Krishna Kirtanena Narsimhena Rakshataya Namaha. Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangulam Gayate Girim Yakripatamaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam. Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Yevacha Paritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai. So I will try to speak a little bit on this topic, and I thought also, since today is the 64 Rounds Day and also Sankirtan Festival is coming up, I'll speak a little bit also because this whole chapter is about the kings and their performance of proper duties. So I did a little bit of research and got from past times of our recent acharyas, recent as in after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, dealing with kings and preaching to kings about the holy name. So we have all three topics in different stories. So it'll be very nice, hopefully. So on this topic that they're speaking now in the purport about the activities of the king and how, in general, Brahmins, because Vidura is asking in the previous verse, how come these Brahmanas who were self-realized and very knowledgeable were even bothering to deal with kings when they shouldn't be agitated by people doing things in the wrong way. They shouldn't be bothered by these certain activities, and they're usually aloof from whatever is happening, as is stated in Manusmriti, and as Vidura is perfectly quoting. That is the duty of the citizens never to insult the king, no matter if he appears to be doing something sinful. And Prabhupada in the purport mentions that it must have been very grievous what King Vena was doing, that the Brahmanas bothered to do something about it. Right? And we see this example in other places in history. For example, the most famous probably is Lord Parashuram. Right? 21 times he went throughout the earth, killing the Kshatriya class, generation after generation. One generation would be born, they would reach maturity, able to fight. He would go through like a lawnmower and clean them out. Then he would wait a little bit so they can have kids and they're a little bit older, and then he goes through again. And cleaning 21 generations he wiped out until finally there was no Kshatriyas left, because it was the desire of the Lord that then the Brahmanas would intervene. Again, coming from the forest, coming from their austerities, they would help the people in general to then have a proper king. And so the next generation of kings that were born after Parashuram were Raja Rishis. They were great Brahmanas, very dedicated to austerity, and were simply dealing with the day-to-day management out of duty. They had no desire for personal power, fame, right, money, prestige, nothing. And so the era that came after Parashuram was one of great prosperity and great, wonder, after he cleaned the earth from those wicked Kshatriyas, right? We see other examples of of Brahmanas intervening with general society. We have the idea of Chanakya Pandit. Chanakya Pandit was very recent, relatively speaking, and he was insulted by King Nanda, right? King Nanda, he insulted him, saying he wanted to have his father's house back. His father was serving the king, was an advisor for the king, and because his father was standing up for what was right, he started talking against the king and making a rebellion, and so the king threw him in jail, and he died in jail, etc. So all he wanted back was his house, basically, Chanakya Pandit. And King Nanda threw him out. And so King Nanda, having humiliated him in that way, he made a vow that he would destroy him and his entire family, right? And put someone proper on the throne. So his entire life, Chanakya's entire life, he dedicated to fixing what was then one of the biggest empires in India. He could have just continued doing his austerities, but Chanakya Pandit went out of his way to do this, right? There's so many other places we have where the Brahmanas then helped in a very positive way. For example, Vyasadeva. After Bhishma took the great vow that he would not have children, and both his nephews, no? Chitrangada and Vichitravirya. There was nephews. Yeah, his nephews. Both his nephews, the next lineage in the throne, died, and without any heir, he had to request the Brahmana Vyasadeva to come and beget children in the queens. And so Vyasadeva came, and from there came Vidura, Pandu, and Dhritarashtra. So that's another place where we see Vyasadeva, a great and most powerful Brahmana who has nothing to do with any of the material functions of this earth, right? He's very dedicated to his austerities, going out of his way to help. And these are extreme circumstances. It's not something that happens every day. So through these different examples, and also we hear in Shastra, that the duty of teaching or instructing has to be something that's left for the Brahmanas. Why for the Brahmanas? Because Brahmanas are renounced. They will give their instruction, but whether the king or the student follows it or not, they have no power. And generally, when you put energy into some project, some person, you expect a certain result. And when you don't get that result, frustration comes. And you want to control that result and get exactly what you want out of that. But if Brahmanas, they have the ability to give the instruction, and whether the person follows it or not, they're able to be renounced, they're able to be detached. And so therefore, these activities of teaching, training, educating is left for Brahmanas. But this only works if the Brahmanas remain detached. As we see in the example of Dronacharya and Kripacharya, there were amazing Brahmanas. Jai Shri Shri Prahlad Lakshmi Shri Bhagwan Ki Jai. They were great devotees, Dronacharya and Kripacharya. But because they were dependent on the Kshatriyas, they were completely dependent, and they were indebted to the family of the Kurus. When the Kurus decided to do something wrong, they had no choice but to follow. They knew it was wrong, and they were telling Dhritarashtra it was wrong, but they had no power, no influence. Why? Because by the corrupt Kshatriyas, but Kshatriyas. Therefore, Brahmanas should never be indebted to anyone. That's why they go begging. That's why they're not maintained by someone. They simply go begging, and if you want to give, you give. They're not indebted either way. And therefore, the culture of society is to help maintain the Brahmanas, but they're not indebted to anyone, so they can continue doing what's right. We see nowadays that's such a problem. The educational facilities are controlled by the government. And so all their political agenda and whatever studies they want the next generation to learn, they have full control. And so how is the Brahmana supposed to do their duties and teach what's right? They can't, because they're controlled. Therefore, gurukuls in the past and educational facilities in the past were somewhere separated from the kingdom. So even if the kingdom goes to hell, the next generation wouldn't be the same. The next generation would be better. The next generation would be something of greater value, because they were learning the pure knowledge, not contaminated through desire, right? Through certain anarthas that the king or the ruling class had at that time. But we see so many times in history when that was not followed, because the Brahmanas were dependent. They were, controlled by the Kshatriyas. So in the example of King Vena, when King Vena was corrupt, the Brahmanas, they instructed him. If you go into the story in detail, they instructed him. They told him what you're doing is wrong. They urged him to change his ways. He didn't. So they cursed him, and he died immediately. This wasn't one of those curses that go become a crocodile or something else. No, it was just done, dead, over. We see in other examples of kings getting cursed, and it's because the Lord is eventually going to come and perform his pastime, so the Brahmana doesn't kill the person right away. He says, you will become this, or you'll have to be born again, or etc., because they know it's not their duty. For example, Ravana was cursed by so many Brahmanas, but none of them cursed him to die, although they might have had the power to do so. Because they knew, being such elevated devotees, they knew that Ramachandra was going to come, so they didn't want to intervene. But in this case, King Vena was wrong, and the Brahmanas came and immediately killed him with their curse. Right? It says Brahmashapa, which means the poison words of a Brahmana, his curse. So they killed him right then and there, and as we're going to see in the future verses, what's coming, the Brahmanas will then put someone who's actually qualified on the throne. And you'll see all the good qualities of a king, and how a king is supposed to function, and how they're supposed to be, and how a society can run under proper leadership. So this is going to be a very interesting chapter, Srimad Bhagavatam, and through this we're going to learn so many different things. We learned from Dhruva Maharaj's pastime, and now Prithu Maharaj's pastime is coming next, and we're going to hear so many different amazing things that we can learn from and apply into our life. Yes? Okay, so I was thinking to follow along the line of kings and to follow along the line of chanting the holy name and Sankirtan. A few days ago was the disappearance day. On Gopashtami was the disappearance day of Srinivasacharya. So as we all know, Srinivasacharya, Shyamananda Pandit, and Narottam Das Thakur are the original 3 Sankirtan devotees. Because before their advent or their preaching, the Goswamis were in Vrindavan writing their books. And in Mayapur or in Nadia, there was, of course, the Sankirtan movement that was started by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But preaching the philosophy and the process of Krishna consciousness wasn't well known. Those devotees who were exalted devotees knew it. Other devotees knew that they should be chanting, and they were chanting and achieving realizations that way. But the nectar of devotional service that Mahaprabhu provided through the Goswamis, through his agents, the Goswamis, was not known. They were writing books and books and books. And Jiva Goswami had his toll, right, his school there. But apart from that, wasn't well known. And so Mahaprabhu, he set the plane so perfectly after his pastimes that the next generation would come and then distribute this, right? And he sent a letter actually to Rupa Goswami describing that Srinivasacharya was going to come. He told him that through you and Sanatan, I am writing the nectar of devotional service, but through Srinivas, I will distribute this. This is the letter he sent to Rupa Goswami. And so when Srinivasacharya was born, Srinivasacharya, I mean, there's so much we can say about his life, but I'll focus more on the subject matter of today, just to give us small details. Srinivasacharya, when he was born while Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was still in this world, while Nityananda Prabhu was still in this world. All Panchatattva were still here. And he was conscious of decided that he should stay in Navadvip through a dream he had, that he should stay and hear the pastimes of Mahaprabhu. So he was going devotee to devotee, hearing the pastimes. And when his desire to see Mahaprabhu was overwhelming and he couldn't take it anymore, he decided to go to Puri. And on the way, he heard from the devotees coming back that Mahaprabhu had already left. So he went to Puri, and of course separation was so great, he decided, I need to go back to Mayapur to see Advaita Acharya and Sri Nityananda Prabhu. And on the way back, he heard that they had left. So his life was just a life in separation. He was going one place searching for them, and they were gone. He was going one place searching for them, and he was gone. His duty was that to distribute this life in separation, this desire to be with Krishna and his devotees. So he had great experience of this, you can imagine. For us, we sometimes lament that we weren't here when Srila Prabhupada was on this planet, and we were born too late. But our distance is 50 years, 40 years, depending on our age. But imagine being on the earth a devotee when Prabhupada was alive and knowing he's in Vrindavan and trying to get there in time to see him and not being able to. Right? So it's a much greater, it's like much closer miss. It's like you get to the train station and you see the train going away. It's much more painful than if you get there an hour late and you're like, oh, it was my fault. If you see it going away, it's much worse. So this pain of Srinivasacharya was so great. But going forward, Srinivasacharya eventually took initiation from, Gopabhata Goswami. And what's interesting is that Gopabhata Goswami in the spiritual world is Gunamanjari. And Srinivasacharya is Manimanjari. And Gunamanjari, Manimanjari's duty is to assist Gunamanjari in all her duties. So guru and disciple are together in the spiritual world and in this world. This is one of those instances that we see. We hear so many times that the spiritual master remains your spiritual master, even furthermore in Goloka Vrindavan, and it's sometimes inconceivable, but here we have a perfect example. And when Srinivasacharya would go into meditation, into samadhi, he would be assisting Gunamanjari in their eternal pastimes on the transcendental realm. So it's really far out that way. So Srinivasacharya, we know the pastime. He, Shyamananda Pandit, and Artam Das Thakur were in the school of Jiva Goswami, learning all the books of all the Goswamis that they were writing, all the philosophy and everything. And they were tasked with taking those books back to Navadvip and spreading them eventually throughout the world. That was their duty. So on the way back, we know the pastime that the king was rightly informed but slightly misguided. His ministers told him that we see in basically they were tantrics, so they could see through their mystic powers that these three Brahmins were carrying a great treasure. And they were carrying it, it's a hidden treasure. It's something that, it's of immense value, they told the king. So the king, wanting to wealth, obviously, he captured the cart, thinking that it was a great treasure. He was right, but not the treasure he thought. And so once he captured the cart, Srinivasacharya, being the eldest of the three, he instructed Narottam Das Thakur to go on to Navadvip and preach Krishna consciousness. Shyamananda Pandit he sent to another part of Nadia, of Bengal. But he's decided to stay and collect the books, regain the books from this king. So he began to preach to this king, and you can imagine the power of Srinivasacharya. He converted the entire kingdom into devotees. It's said there's one book called Karnananda that was written by Yarunandana Das Thakur, a very famous writer. The quote goes that every single devotee of Srinivasacharya residing in Kanchana Gadiya, this was the area, used to chant 100,000 names daily, which is 64 rounds. If they did not finish this quota of chanting in the daytime, then they would chant all night. At night, they would sit up and tie their shikas to poles to ensure they didn't fall asleep. Right? They had to finish their 100,000 rounds. Due to such determination for chanting, they were the life and soul of their spiritual master, Srinivasacharya. Right? And Srinivasacharya was the life and soul for them. Thus, Srinivas Acharya would often reside there. So you see, these devotees, they weren't doing it even though it was a rule in the kingdom, you can say, that devotees had to chant this many rounds. It was a necessity, right? It wasn't out of fear, they did it out of love and dedication. And because they were doing it so, with such dedication, right? It might sound a little funny to tie your shika up so you don't fall asleep, but they did it out of dedication that Srinivasacharya loved them so dearly. And they love Srinivasacharya so much. So we can see that by following the simple principles that Srila Prabhupada gave us, chant 16 rounds, follow 4 regulative principles, if we do it with dedication, it's a way to please the spiritual master. And he actually becomes very pleased and become very dear to him. So this is the great relationship and faith that they had in Srinivasacharya. So the entire kingdom of this king that he preached to, I think he's also called Vishnupur in other places, that he made them all devotees. The ministers, the kings, everyone were devotees. And this was actually like a common trait within all those 3 personalities, right? We have Shyamananda Pandit, Narottam Das Thakur, and Srinivasacharya. So this king in Vishnupur was with Srinivasacharya. Now I'll speak a little bit about another king out of the many kings that Narottam Das Thakur converted. But one of the kings was named Raja Narasimha, very famous king. So this Raja Narasimha, he was approached by the entire congregation of Brahmanas because they were criticizing Narottam Das Thakur that he's born of a Kshatriya race, right? He's not a Brahmin race, number 1. And he is initiating Brahmanas, he's initiating everyone into this new cult of Vaishnavism, which they really weren't very familiar with as of yet, and changing everything, basically, completely turning over society because the Brahmanas, they had prestige, they had power, right? They were respected, but now everyone is just going to Narottam. Why? Because he's a true devotee, obviously, but because the process of Krishna consciousness was so attractive, no one was going to the Durga temples, to the Kali temples, no one was giving any charity or donations to these so-called Brahmanas. And so they were very angry, and they went to Raja Narasimha requesting him to, fix the problem. Tell him that you must go and punish him. So he said, wait a minute, he's also a very respectable person, and so we must fix this in the proper way. And so Raja Narasimha up to that point hadn't had any interaction with Narottam Das Thakur, but he heard so much of the glories of Narottam Das Thakur. Well, there was one Brahmana, of course we know, Ganganarayan Chakravarti, right? He was one of the greatest Pandits and Brahmanas in that era. And he became a disciple of Narottam Das Thakur. So when that happened, it sent, shockwaves all over that area that this great person had become a devotee. It's, for example, if today Trump becomes a devotee tomorrow, everyone in the world is going to be like, what is Krishna consciousness? This guy who has been speaking all nonsense for this many years all of a sudden becomes a devotee. What's going on? Right? So, of course, that's in a negative sense, but someone that famous, Ganganarayan Chakravarti, became a devotee, took initiation from Narottam Das Thakur. And so he was hearing the glories of Narottam Das Thakur. And so what he decided to do is send a letter. And already having great admiration for Narottam Das Thakur, his letter was written in a very humble and submissive way, just presenting the problem to Narottam Das Thakur and saying, what can we do about it? So Narottam Das Thakur said, you can tell them that if, that this process of Krishna consciousness is, of course, the best, and also establishing the superiority of Vaishnavas and how there is this, Brahmin caste and all this. And he said, I'm willing to debate on the subject. If they have some questions, they can come and we'll clarify everything. And so Raja Narasimha, taking this as an opportunity to he himself go see Narottam Das Thakur, he arranged a great big procession, a great party of Brahmanas. He told them, you all come, you bring your greatest Pandit, and we all go to Narottam Das Thakur and debate. And whoever wins, that'll be the correct, right? So he took, along with him, there was one very famous Brahmana, Rupanarayan Pandit or Chakravarti. He was very, very famous and very well-renowned, very knowledgeable. And so him, along with a great host of Brahmanas and scholars, they decided to go to Keturi, which was where Narottam Das Thakur was stationed. And so on the way, seeing this big procession of Brahmanas, the news reached Narottam Das Thakur and his 2 disciples, Ramachandra, well, not his disciple, but his 2 followers, Ramachandra Kaviraj and Ganganarayan Chakravarti. And they, being very dear disciples to their spiritual master, said, why should he have to bother with these puffed up brahmanas who are going to come in this offensive manner to disrupt his devotional service? So they made up a plan to curb the pride of this great procession, because they were coming with elephants and carriages and palanquins. You know, we are the great brahmanas. So they went to a village outside of Katuri. And they dressed themselves, one as a pot maker, you know, a clay pot maker, and another one as a pan seller who sells betel nut and pan. You know, both very low-class jobs that are usually done by people with zero to very little education, apart from what they need, you know. So they were sitting there on the outsides of the village, and when the great party came by, the students of these pandits went to the village to get supplies. And they were getting pots, and they were getting things. And in the meantime, they were listening to Ganganarayan Chakravarti and Ramachandra Kaviraj discuss in fluent Sanskrit. They were talking about great poetics, you know, and dissecting different verses from very difficult Puranas that many people don't know. And they were speaking fluent Sanskrit. Not only were they speaking Sanskrit, but they were dissecting the grammar of these Puranas in such a way that they never heard before, such eloquency. And so these disciples, they thought, who is these, you know, pan seller and pot maker? You know, how can they know Sanskrit? So they started debating with them. They just entered a conversation and were destroyed in seconds by Ganganarayan Chakravarti and Ramachandra Kaviraj. And so they went to their masters and they said that in this village, even the pot makers and the pan sellers are great scholars, what to speak of Narottam Das Thakur. And so the Pandits themselves went there and they started arguing with the pan maker and with the pot seller and were destroyed as well, right? So they went back to the king and said, my dear king, I think it's not a good idea that we go see Narottam Das Thakur. I think better we simply go back and not interfere with whatever he's doing. They didn't want to accept defeat, but they didn't want to actually go and get defeated by Narottam Das Thakur, right? Because if the pan seller and pot maker of a village outside of Katuri, it wasn't even Katuri itself, it was on the outskirts of Katuri, can defeat them, what to speak of Narottam Das Thakur. So the king said, okay, if you don't want to debate, you can go, no problem. But the king was overjoyed within because he was thinking, now I'm going to get to see Narottam Das Thakur. And so that night, Rupanarayan Chakravarti, the other great Brahmana who was there, he was thinking about this. And he was thinking, what should I do? Should I go? Should I stay? And his family deity was Durga Ma. So Durga came to him in his dream and said, you rascal, right? How dare you? How dare you even think of challenging my devotee? Not my devotee, but the devotee of my master, right? You should go there at once and surrender unto him. Give up all your attachments. Chastise him severely in his dream. And so the next day, Rupanarayan Chakravarti and King Raj Narasimha, they decided that they alone would go and see Narottam Das Thakur. So they sent their palanquins away, they sent their procession away, and they walked from there, getting close to Katuri. And when they entered into Katuri, they crawled. They felt so insignificant, they didn't even want to walk on the dust of Katuri. They would crawling to the house of Narottam Das Thakur. And when they arrived there, they surrendered their lives, and Narottam Das Thakur very graciously instructed them, initiated them, gave them the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And Raj Narasimha, not only that, he then sent for his wife, his ministers, his generals, all of them to come, and got them all initiated by Narottam Das Thakur. Right? His wife was, I think, Mala Dasi, and she was renowned as one who could chant many hundreds of thousands of names of the Lord. She was, you know, a great devotee of the Lord. She was considered saintly from that day on. Very dedicated disciple of Srila Narottam Das Thakur. So this is another example of a king, a proper king, someone who actually can follow the rules and regulations and take instructions, and made an entire kingdom devotees. So we have one kingdom in Sri Vishnupur, this other kingdom near Keturi, nowadays Bangladesh, and now we're going to hear about another one that was preached by Rasikananda. So Rasikananda was a disciple of Shyamananda Pandit. So this is the main three. Shyamananda Pandit was making kingdoms into devotees long before already. But this is another pastime, and this shows the faith in Guru Nishta, right? This is all these pastimes, but this one in particular I pretty much took verbatim, word for word, by my spiritual master, Srilendra Dumnaswami. And so he speaks how Guru Nishta is the most important quality for a disciple. By Guru Nishta, he's able to imbibe properly the instructions of the spiritual master without deviating. So this feature of Guru Nishta was exemplified so well by Rasikananda that one day, Rasikananda, he was eating lunch with his family. Rasikananda, I think, had 4 daughters, 2 sons. He had a big family. He was eating lunch, and he had taken one mouthful and was going to take the second mouthful. And as he was getting close to his mouth, a messenger came from his spiritual master saying that he wants to see you now. So a messenger came and said, Shyamananda Pandit, he is in Vrindavan, which is far away, obviously, from Mayapur. He wants to see you now. And so Shyamananda Pandit didn't eat that second Rasikananda didn't eat that second mouthful. He put it down, washed his hands, and walked out the door. And this isn't, going across to the guest house. This is a month walk. But he had such faith and dedication that he was there was nothing more important. It wasn't, okay, I'll finish eating, I'll pack my bag, I'll get everything ready. No, it was now, now, now. And he immediately just ran out the door, going to see his spiritual master. And when he got there, all his spiritual master wanted was to ask him how he's doing. Shyamananda Pandit says, I'm so happy to see you. I heard about your preaching. You've converted, this many cities, I forgot how many, into devotees. You should go now and preach in the forests. You should preach to the tribals in the forest. That's all he wanted. He just wanted to give a little instruction. But there was no insignificance. Seeing his spiritual master was everything Rasikananda wanted. And if we hear the pastimes of Rasikananda, we can see that he is not a person of this world, right? He is unimaginable, the kind of miracles he performed. Going on, then one of these cities that Rasikananda converted into devotees, he was giving a lecture in the court of the king. And the king and all his ministers, everyone was there listening to the lecture on Srimad Bhagavatam that Rasikananda was giving. And next to the king was standing the manager of all the king's wealth, so the treasurer and the manager of all the properties, who was also a disciple of Rasikananda. His name was Ramakrishna, one of the first disciples of Rasikananda. And so while he's giving this class, the king for a second turned his focus to look outside the window and was seeing some activities, some sport or some, there were a big festival was going on, so there were some activities outside. So for a second, he just turned and was looking and watching this. And Ramakrishna, he saw the king, and he blasted him in front of everyone, right? I will say exactly what he said. He said, "O king, you are an ignorant fellow. You have given up hearing the nectarian topics of Lord Krishna from the mouth of my spiritual master to watch some frivolous sports outside." He slapped the king. Right, bam, the king knocked out right there and then, right? Imagine the faith in spiritual master. He didn't care what was going to happen to him. Immediately, right, the generals of the king and guards came to kill Ramakrishna because he slapped the king and knocked him out. But the king quickly came back to consciousness, grabbed the feet of Ramakrishna and told the ministers, stop, right? And what did the king say? He said, "My dear ministers, I've committed a sin. For that, Ramakrishna Das has punished me justly." Rasikananda was discussing the topics of Krishna, but I allowed my attention to wander elsewhere. It is the verdict of all scriptures that any topic other than those concerning Lord Krishna are like poison. That person who allows his attention to wander away from the topics of Krishna is a sinner, and I have been rightly punished by Ramakrishna. My dear ministers, he has saved me and shown proof of his affection for me, right? So he's showing his affection for me by not letting me do something wrong, right? If he had let me continue listening to being distracted, I would have committed Vaishnava aparad. I would have committed aparad against Krishna, right? But Ramakrishna has shown his affection. This is the sign of a true friend, putting you on the right path. So he said he's shown his affection for me, his love for me, by putting me in my place. And so he embraced Ramakrishna. And Rasikananda, seeing this, was so happy to see the proper interaction between devotees. Ramakrishna, his Guru Nishta, right? And his dedication to his spiritual master. And the king, with his understanding of proper principles and, feeling so indebted to Ramakrishna for what he did. So Rasikananda continued speaking, and the king had Ramakrishna sit with him on the throne. They sat next to each other, and they listened to the lecture together like this. So you can imagine this kind of Krishna consciousness that was there at that time of these great devotees. And the entire city, just like the other city of Vishnupur, there was a prescribed amount of rounds that was given to all the citizens. There were festivals on every single holy day, right? On every appearance day, on every Ekadashi, was huge festivals held. And even to this day, if you go there, you'll see in almost every house, they have an altar. And there'll be Mahaprabhu, there'll be Krishna, Radha Krishna, and they perform their devotional service in a very natural way. I remember we went there, and it was, you would go to the house, and they weren't ISKCON devotees. Some places, a big amount of the houses were. You would go to a village, and there was, you know, small grass huts, and they would have Japataka Swami, they would have, you know, Mayapur, whole, like, huge posters. So they have, like, a huge altar just with posters and pictures. And they have Mangalarti, Darshanarti. It's pretty far out. Huge amount of them are ISKCON devotees, but even those who are not, it's such a natural Krishna conscious environment there. And just, it was just like a way of life for them. And this is since the time of Rasikananda, since the time of Shyamananda Pandit. So we can see through these most amazing stories of these amazing Sankirtan devotees, right? We have Shyamananda Pandit, Srinivasacharya, Narottam Das Thakur, who are spreading Krishna consciousness in such a pure way that entire nations would turn to that. It wasn't just a few devotees. It was everyone from top to down, the king, his queens, ministers, everyone was taking initiation from Narottam Das Thakur, from Shyamananda Pandit, Srinivasacharya. And if we had kingdoms like this nowadays, it would be a lot easier for everyone and everything would run a lot more smoothly. But it is our duty now to kind of imbibe that purity and imbibe that simplicity in our preaching, that it becomes very accessible and people can readily take it up and follow it. Yeah? So that's all I had prepared. If there's any questions or comments, it would be appreciated. Yes, Prabhu.
It seems like that the oldest great devotees, they didn't have any desire to be, you know, they just did their sadhana and then they were empowered. It just didn't happen. It was not that they made big preparations or something like that to do so, to convince or to, you know, but still it happened. So what we see, for example, on Srila Prabhupada, also Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, there was a great eagerness to spread the holy name and bring them, you know, or bring these teachings to the Western world. So what should we have? Should we be more like renounced and detached and just attached to our sadhana? Or should we cultivate also some kind of eagerness to be an instrument?
Thank you very much for your question, Prabhu. It is a wonderful question. It brings up a lot. I actually see more similarities between Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and all of our acharyas, especially not any of those preaching acharyas. Those who did great preaching, they all have something in common. And what I notice is two main things. Number one is that they spend some time before their great preaching developing themselves, right? Focusing on their own sadhana, as you say, but like in the case of Srinivasacharya, he was going to devotee, hearing the pastimes of Mahaprabhu, listening about, you know, the philosophy, hearing pastimes, and just kind of accumulating this faith and accumulating this strength and desire to be with the Lord, to a quantity we can't imagine, right? He was just going devotee to devotee to devotee. And we see the same with Narottam Das Thakur. After he left home, he went to Vrindavan, right? Then there he met with the Goswamis. He heard from them, the Goswamis. He went back to Mayapur, heard from any associates of Mahaprabhu who were still alive. And he went through this whole period working on himself and making himself into a person that's able to give what he has, right? We see the same with, Rasikananda was kind of born divine, but he came with the mercy of Shyamananda Pandit, and Shyamananda Pandit also had this time when he was performing first in the ashram of Hridaya Chaitanya when he was taking care of the Tulsi garden, right? His name was Dukhi Krishna at that time, and he was tasked with bringing water and watering the flowers and the Tulsi in the Lord's garden. And he was doing it so much that where he was carrying the pot, there was an open wound. He didn't notice the pain, but there was an open wound on his head and on his shoulders where he was carrying the pot from friction. And there were maggots and worms living inside out of the infection. because he was just going nonstop. He enjoyed the service so much. And then afterwards in Seva Kunj, right, he was sweeping the floor and sweeping. And this was, it wasn't a tapasya for him. It wasn't necessary purification. But then he got the instruction from Radharani. Then he got the mercy. It was kind of their effort to get the mercy. And once they had the mercy, they were willing to spread it. And their eagerness to spread was, I mean, you see the same Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur. There's that point in his life when he went to Mayapur. There he went to Nirdoy Ghat, right? The place where Jagai Madai was. And he was chanting there in the forest for it was a whole year or more? Huh? 9.5 years. How many rounds was he chanting a day? Right? He was chanting, and the people would hear him running in the forest and screaming the Lord's name. They would see him jumping in Ganga, coming out hours later. So there was that same kind of period where he was working on himself, and then when he finished that period, he took sannyas, and then he went and preached. And Srila Prabhupada the same. He was trying to preach, trying so many things, but finally when he went to Vrindavan, he left his family, he went to Vrindavan, and then he was sitting he's talking in Lilamrita, he's sitting in front of Rupa Goswami's Samadhi, and he would be staring at them and praying, how am I supposed to fulfill the instruction of my spiritual master? So all of our acharyas, especially those who went on preaching, they spent time first developing themselves to be able to get the mercy of Guru and Gauranga to then be able to preach it. And this is something that I think we can focus on. And what little we have, we can spread. I was listening to Jadurani Maharaji talk about Srila Prabhupada, and she was expressing her desire to go and learn art. She wanted to learn because she said, if I draw even nicer, people will come from all over the world to see my paintings like they do for the Mona Lisa and for the art of Leonardo da Vinci. So if I go and I learn art, I can make even more beautiful paintings. And Prabhupada, he answered with a story. He said that there was one servant who didn't speak any English. This is during the time of the British Raj. And the master, while he was away, the master's house lit on fire, and he had to go communicate to the people in the house that the house is on fire. So if he would have gone and learned English and then come back to tell his master, everyone would have died. So he said, in some way or other, he managed to communicate that the house is on fire. So in the same way, whatever skills and propensity we have now, we should start engaging it already. And that's why devotees go on Sankirtan and we preach and we do as much as we can. But in the same time, we can continue developing ourselves and making ourselves more able to give something that we actually have. There's that famous story, Prabhupada talks about it, Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about it, about the Brahmana with the sugar candy. You know this story? There was a kid, and he was addicted to eating sugar, palmistry. I don't know if you ever had it. It's addictive. It's good. And he would just eat nonstop. He would steal it. He would, he couldn't stop eating it. And so the mother, he was getting sick. He just couldn't stop eating the sugar. So the mother took this child to the sage who was living in the outside of the village and asked, my dear sage, can you please tell my son, I tell him every day not to eat sugar, he's still eating it. Can you please instruct him? So the sage said, please come back in 2 weeks. I can't tell him right now, please come back in 2 weeks. So the mother was a little confused. She took the child back. 2 weeks later, she brought the child again. My dear sage, please, can you tell him now? He has to stop eating sugar. He's getting sick. And the sage said, please come back. I need just 1 more week. 1 more week. And so the mother came back after 1 week. And the sage said, okay, come here. Told the child, don't eat sugar. The child said, okay. And stopped eating sugar. Never again would the child eat sugar. And so the mother was so confused. I mean, who wouldn't be, right? So the mother went to the sage and said, my dear sage, thank you so much. My child stopped eating sugar. He's completely cured. He's not addicted anymore. Everything's okay. But why did you make me wait 2 weeks, then 1 week? And, why didn't you just tell him this the first time? And the sage said, because I myself was addicted to eating candy. I myself had the taste for eating candy. If I would have told him when I myself was contaminated, my words would have had no power. Right? But I had to get rid of the habit. And so when I shared something I had, right, when I shared my freedom from this attachment, he listened. And it was so easily accepted by the child. And so the words of Krishna, the words of the Srimad Bhagavatam, have power coming from anyone. But they have special power when they're touched by the lips of a pure devotee. We hear that again and again. Srila Prabhupada speaking, how just one word he would say and it would click. Sometimes he would repeat the instruction. In the case of my spiritual master, I was listening day before yesterday. And my spiritual master had the opportunity to fly with Srila Prabhupada. And so because of the commotion, Prabhupada was leaving, thousands of devotees in the airport, huge, mess. My spiritual master was alone with Srila Prabhupada. They went through customs and they were walking to the plane. And Prabhupada was looking around at all the people in the airport, rushing and miserable and unhappy. The scene in an airport, everybody's tired, everybody's annoyed. It's not a very happy place, let's say. So Prabhupada is looking around and he says, these people, because of their association with the material energy, they have no good qualities. But if they give up this attachment and come to Krishna consciousness, then all good qualities will come. And he turned to my spiritual master and said, do you understand? But my spiritual master was also, in the phrase and not listening. So he said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. A minute goes by, Prabhupada again says, just see, these people, so indulged in the material energy that they have no good qualities. But if they come to Krishna consciousness, they'll have all good qualities. Do you understand it, Dudumna? He said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. Again, not really paying attention. Prabhupada said a third time, he said, just see, no good qualities. Do you understand? And my Guru Maharaj said it was like a light bulb went off. I was just like, yes, I understand. These people, they have no good qualities because they're so immersed in material energy, controlled by the three modes of material nature. But if they turn to Krishna consciousness, then all good qualities will come. He understood. Hearing 3 times, so many times in Shastra, we hear 3 times, right? The famous verse, Harir Nama, Harir Nama, Harir Nama eva kevalam, kalo nastyeva, nastyeva, nastyeva. 3 times, gatiranyata. There's no other way. And Shastra says you hear something 3 times, it stays. So the words of a pure devotee, or the words of Shastra, the words of Srimad Bhagavatam, these pastimes, coming from anyone, from anyone have effect. But when they come from a pure devotee, they have effect on everyone to such a deep amount that immediately we're able to take it to heart and apply it. In Shastra it says you can take a good wife from any family, money from a dirty place, advice from a fool, and the last one? I thought advice from a fool was the last one. There's one more there. Niti Shastra. Anyway, there's 4 things you can take from anywhere. And so the last one is good advice from anyone. You don't have to take it from a specific person. So that you can take it on and apply it in your life. But if you hear it from a pure devotee, it's embedded in you. It's like when Haridas Thakur and Nityananda Prabhu would go to door and say, chant Hare Krishna. Imagine the power in their words. Immediately people would chant Hare Krishna. That's all they wanted, right? But we go to door, it might be a little bit different experience. Some people may take it to heart and become a devotee. Some people just hear it and say, get away with this Hare Krishna, we'll still be happy. But this is the process. So we can, like Ramananda Prabhu inspired to say, we can focus on ourselves and take this as a time of purification and developing something that we have to give. If we have nothing to give, it's very difficult. Yeah, if you actually have something and you actually believe in something, it's a lot more easy to distribute. There's another story, we have time. There's another story that there was one drunkard. He was a kid and he was a complete drug addict. It was in Hawaii, in the temple. No, in Paris, sorry. And the devotees, they named him Pigpen, like very disheveled and dirty. And he would come to the temple sometimes asking for food, but he couldn't even speak. He was so drugged out, he couldn't even speak. And so eventually he started hanging around a little bit, and devotees were preaching to him. And so he started hearing a little bit about Srila Prabhupada and a little bit about, at that time they would preach to everyone and anyone. This person couldn't even speak, but they would preach to him. And so when Prabhupada came, they were on a morning walk one day, and this person, who obviously was hearing about Srila Prabhupada and the mercy of a pure devotee and the lotus feet of a pure devotee, lunged at Prabhupada's feet, trying to grab Prabhupada's feet. from the bushes. You know, he was in his homeless little thing, jumped at Prabhupada's feet, and someone grabbed him and threw him back in the bushes. So they're coming back from the morning walk, and when they get to the door of the temple, the door is wide open. So immediately some devotees started thinking, oh, Pigpen must have came, right? And he's in the temple. So they came in looking for him, but he was too fast. And he ran and grabbed Prabhupada's feet and was holding on Prabhupada's feet, you know, crying on Prabhupada's feet. This mess of hair and dirty clothes, you can imagine. And Prabhupada just rubbed his head, you know, dust was flying out, rubbed his head. It's okay, everything's okay, everything's okay. And then he said, Hare Krishna. And then they took him off and threw him in the corner of the temple. And he was sitting there in the corner of the temple, completely drugged out. The rest of the program, no one wants to touch him anymore because Prabhupada showed him mercy. You know, now he has to stay. So my Guru Maharaj was the temple president. He said, okay, go clean him up. So they shaved him up. They put him in a dhoti. And he stayed around. He was doing little service here and there. So after some time, his speech started clearing up, and he was able to pronounce, you know, a few words. And so he would start chanting, and in the corner you would hear him all day. They couldn't even pronounce the Maha Mantra properly. So one day they were packing up the Sankirtan van, getting ready for Sankirtan. And as they're filling in the back of the van, they see Pigpen jump in the front seat. And they say, what are you doing? You know, Sankirtan, I want to go Sankirtan. He says, you can't go on Sankirtan. What are you gonna do? And he says, you know, Sankirtan. So my Guru Maharaj asked him, why do you want to go on Sankirtan? And he turns to my Guru Maharaj with all devotion and dedication. He says, Prabhupada saved me. He said, Prabhupada saved me. So my Guru, you know, how can you argue with that? So I said, okay. So they went on Sankirtan. They went. And they get out of the van, they eat their breakfast, you know, back then, huge breakfast, and they're slowly packing in their books, and they see Pigpen just run out of the parking lot with a bag full of books. And they're trying to stop him. You know, you can imagine his dhoti, how he was put in the chadar. And they thought he's going to get arrested for sure. They were like, but they're too tired and too full to do anything about it. So they start packing in their bags, and they're ready to start leaving, and they see Pigpen come back with no books in his bag. His bag's empty. He said, Pigpen, what do you do? Where are the books? He said, Sankirtan, I distributed them. He said, what do you mean? Like, how? Well, how did you do it? He said, no, I distributed. And he said, how? What did you say to the people? And he said, Prabhupada saved me. That's all he would say. Prabhupada saved me. And he would be pushing books in people's hands. And he was the best book distributor for years after that. That's all he would say, Prabhupada saved me, and he was convinced about it. He didn't need to say anything else. He didn't know anything else. Prabhupada saved me, and that's what he would say. I forgot, he got initiated later on, and he was, you know, top of the charts for many years. But my Guru Maharaj said that was such a powerful experience, seeing this person with such conviction, sharing what he knows, sharing what he believes in. So if we can develop something that we believe in that much, any part of Krishna consciousness, be it, you know, our faith in chanting, our faith in distributing prasadam, our faith in worshipping the deity, our faith in cleaning the pots, as Shyamananda Pandit, you know, cleaning the floors of Sevakunj, then we will achieve. And we'll be able to share something that we have. So I think that should be our focus now. To get something, you know, get some mercy that we can share with everyone. Yes, Prabhu? No, I was just saying if that's okay.
You know, because mostly we tend, especially when we come new to the temple, we have this enthusiasm, and this is good. But if it's not reciprocated, then we lose. You know, we think, oh, you know, whatever, it doesn't work or whatever. But we see this great Acharyas, they did their preparations and followed some sadhana, basically. Yeah. Thank you.
We'll go for breakfast. We're a little late. And everyone, please have a wonderful day in chanting the Maha Mantra. I pray that everyone will finish more rounds than 64 in a very blissful and happy way without having to tie your shikas up. Pretty far out. Okay. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Srinivasacharya ki, Jai Nitai, Gaura Premanandi.